When it comes to overpowered vehicles in World of Tanks, there are a ton of them within the game, and I'm sure that you can reel off at least 5 or 6 straight off the bat, and I'm almost guaranteeing you that the 2 that we're going to showcase in today's game are going to be in that list. Of course, the T95 Chieftain and of course the Object 279E, and there's a reason why these tanks are so overpowered and they're able to have a 58% or higher average win rate. That is just disgusting, considering that the average win rate of players on World of Tanks is less than 50%. And what makes these tanks so overpowered? Well, that's exactly what we're going to showcase in today's video, and how these tanks can be so outrageous, what Wargaming got wrong with them, and the sort of reasonings behind overpowered tanks in general. But straight off the bat, we're seeing a game on Pearl River, and this is the best game in the Chieftain I have seen in a long time, and it is one of the ones that I'm sure if you've been checking out the What Replay site in recent times, you most likely seen as the top on damage. And that's because not only does this tank have the ability to deal damage, it has armor, it has gun depression, it has a good amount of mobility, and that is one of the reasons what makes vehicles like this just completely overpowered, along with the fact that when you compare it to the other tier 10 tanks, it just blows them out the water. And you can see within what, 2 minutes of the game starting, with probably a minute of that actually spent moving, he's been able to pick up 3,000 damage. And don't worry, it continues. It's not like this game gets stale. This one is a just continuous onslaught of opponents as he moves forward. And that is really why you find that these tanks can be super versatile, because they have this great accuracy. And when Wargaming give them too much of one thing or another, that it just ends up that they have too much of everything, and then they have no downsides. I mean, the Chieftain doesn't particularly have that much of a downside. I guess you could say that it's maybe because they don't have the best mobility in the game. It's not able to do 60 kilometers an hour, but I mean, if that's a balancing feature, I don't really know what Wargaming are trying to intend here. And of course, because these vehicles are very unlikely to get nerfed, the problem just keeps on growing, and you're seeing here up against the entire flank, and within 3 minutes of the battle starting, 5,380 damage, and this is seen in both replays that we're showcasing today. And I'd be very interested to see what your thoughts on the 2 vehicles are. What makes them overpowered to you when you're playing the game and you see these in the game? What is it that really just frustrates the hell out of you, and what makes them such a nuisance and an annoyance to come up against? Yeah, I'd be very interested to see, because for me, it is the fact that they combine armor and just very easy to play when it comes to being forgiving. And I mean by that, you know, you can come up against these tanks and they really are very kind of easy for people to get the hang of. I mean, they don't take the biggest amount of skill, and when you think about the fact that a lot of tanks like the paper vehicles in the game and stuff like that have very similar statistics to these tanks that also get the armor, it makes them just really annoying. And when you have accuracy that is basically medium tanks, when you have the mobility that is essentially a medium tank, when you got hull armor and turret armor that is very powerful, and when you have the DPM that these tanks have, there's really no downside. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I feel like people hate vehicles like this. And when you then combine it with the fact that you look at some of the mediums in the game and they sacrifice so much to be able to get that damage per minute, or to be able to get the accuracy, and these just do not whatsoever. And Wargaming then decide that instead of giving them the typical weak points like you'd see with some of the American heavy tanks, you know, the big cupolas and stuff like that, these basically have nothing. And when they're using the 10 degrees of gun depression that this one gets, you can essentially say goodbye to being able to pen the cupola entirely, and you've just got to rely on being able to hit the hull armor, which, when you consider how many hold down positions are in the game and the meta that the game is currently in with the hold down heavies, yeah, I mean, There's no reason why you would want to play some of the mediums over these two tanks if you have them and you're wanting to be the most competitive vehicles. Now unfortunately, you're seeing here the weak point of the Griller. Now the Griller, focusing mainly on having the high alpha damage, is able to deal with a lot of opponents from range. It has good accuracy, but there's nothing he can really do. It's so inflexible, whereas the Chieftain can poke around that ridgeline, not really exposing any of its hull armour. And what do you do against a Chieftain like that when you're playing in something like the Griller? Not a lot. And that's exactly why I feel like you see so many of these results where things like the Chieftain are able to do over 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 damage, and they are really just broken vehicles when it comes to the core of it, because they do, like I've said, get way too many advantages and no disadvantages, and I'm sure that you can agree if you've been enjoying this video so far. But so far 11,000 damage, but don't worry, because there's still 6,218 damage left within this game, and it will certainly be feeding the Chieftain as it moves on. And oh look, another tier 10 tank destroyer that of course has the high alpha and is able to devastate the Chieftain, and there's really so much that the Griller can do. It's yeah, going to be very fun for the Griller as he's being sausage sandwiched between him and an FE 4005, and uh-oh, the Mouse has also caught himself in a lovely little trap. Now the FE has taken a decent chunk of damage, but I mean, doesn't really matter when you can side scrape out with side skirts that absorb any of the heat rounds you may receive, and when you have an E100 and Mouse and vehicles like that that predominantly have to rely on that armour, and they don't really have any on the turret, then yeah, I mean, the Chieftain just is basically better than even some of the strongest super heavies in the game when it comes to getting hulled down. So, having picked up some damage on both the Griller and the Mouse, he's managed to grant himself nearly 12,000 damage, and there's nothing spectacular that's happened in this game. Granted, I mean, the gameplay has been almost perfect in what you need to do, but it's not like he's brought out some weird, really insane positions that are completely broken or anything like that. It's just playing ridge lines, poking around corners, using the ability to block between him and his opponents, and not overcommitting within flanks to expose side armor. I mean, this is just a very, very good example of how powerful this can be when you just do all of the basics correct, and that is why both this and the 279E have such good win rates on average compared to a lot of the other vehicles. I mean, it's just crazy how good these ones are, and I'm not saying that it's all down to the tank that players can come away with results like this, but it certainly helps hugely when you're given a rifle up against people with swords. I mean, what are they going to do for the most part? Now, you're seeing here also, the tank gets max view range when you've got it in the setup here, and that means that not only are you able to spot opponents, and yes, you don't have the best camo, no one's going to be saying that this is a light tank, but it can as soon as spot opponents, even mediums like the Leopard 1 there. They really don't have any advantage at this kind of ranges. He's in an open field, so I mean, granted, it definitely helps, but it's not like he can get away with a whole lot, and I hope that that's what this video is showcasing, is that yeah, Wargaming just go way too far with some of the tanks, and I wanted to take the topic of, you know, if Wargaming keep producing vehicles like this. We've seen it recently with the BZ-176 where they just give it everything and they detract from every other tank that has supposed to have that one amazing feature. I mean, for example, you take the BZ-176, it gets that super high alpha damage gun, super consistent, and has the turret that's very, very powerful. I mean, basically tier 10 armor at tier 8. It has good mobility, it has the ability to rocket boost, and yeah, you then compare it to something like an ISU, which has the same sort of alpha, and it's like, why would you play the ISU when you can play the BZ? There are so many other opportunities for you to play different vehicles that it's just kind of disgusting. And that's really my gripe with seeing vehicles like this. And eventually you just come into this stage where if you release tanks like this constantly, everyone's just not going to play an average vehicle anymore. And you keep doing this on and on, and then you're going to end up with just every single tank being super cracked and super broken. And it's just no fun for everyone that's trying to play, and when you consider that these are the reward tanks played by some of the best players in the game, it makes it 10 times worse, because not only are these tanks insanely good as they are, but also the fact that when you're playing up against some of the best players who've been able to do all of the challenges, to complete the operations and missions to get there, they obviously have to have some level of skill, and that definitely adds to the problem. With giving the best players and the players that are able to do some of the best feats in the game the best tanks. And yeah, brilliant idea, Wargaming. I always love their mentality when it comes to things like this. And here you go, the Leopard 1 in the cap circle, not looking all too great for the Leopard 1, and with 2,000 hit points still left in the game, and having picked up 14,000 damage, yes, 14,000 in this 11-minute game. I mean, he's been consistently getting over 1,000 damage every single minute, and yeah, that's what this tank can do. That's how flexible these can be. And when you look at a tank like the Leopard 1 that does have, for all intents and purposes, a very good gun, it has very good mobility, it's able to be quite flexible, and is supposed to be a super flexible medium tank, you then compare it to this one, and it's like, well, what's the Leopard 1 realistically going to do if both tanks are on the same amount of hit points? The Leopard might get the slight DPM advantage, but it's not enough to consistently, reliably pen this tank, because, at the end of the day, you're going to be able to deal a ton of damage to the Chieftain if you get round the side of it or whatever, but the Chieftain doesn't have horrendous damage per minute that is going to be like a superb way of removing him, but it's just primarily down to how much damage you can deal round when this thing is getting YOLO'd, and it's really the only way of taking these out reliably. But you can see there, 15,000 damage in this game, and yeah, he gave it a whirl and unfortunately lost the game in a game where you deal that much damage. I mean, I would be triggered at how my teammates are performing, but at the same time, I would never be upset with a 15k result and one of the best games in the Chieftain, and I mean, for the above reasons. But let's jump in to the 279E and have a look at this one too. So we've seen what the souped up medium heavy hybrid has with the T95 Chieftain, but what about the pure heavy tank that is just better than every other one in the game, and how well this can play when you get it under the right hands? And we're going to see a gameplay where he of course makes the aggressive push towards the bridge, where you can get hold down, raise up that frontal plate of the 279E such that you can then in essence bounce a ton more rounds, because the angle becomes even more steep on this frontal armour, and that means that even tier 10 tank destroyers with high penetration aren't even able to reliably pen you either. And I'm talking about Jaegerus with heat rounds. Yes, you will be penned every now and again, but at the end of the day, it's not that reliable. This is where this tank becomes just disgusting, and I'm sure that you know about this position. I mean, the Kranvang used to be absolutely cracked when it could get into somewhere like this, and not only does it increase the effectiveness of having that armour on the front, but it also increases the cupola effectiveness, because what happens? Well, you end up with the fact that essentially they become near impossible to actually pen, because this is the angle at which you're seeing. I mean, trying to hit a cupola like that, it's basically impossible. You look at that and the E5, they are just completely disgustingly different, and it just makes it almost, I mean, it's just not fair for the enemy team. And I'm sure you guys know about when a 279E has YOLO'd you, and it's like, yay, the only place I can pen it from the front reliably is in the cupolas, unless you're in these high alpha, high penetration tank destroyers like the Jaegeru with heat rounds and premium rounds. Then, I mean, yeah, but even then, it's not a guaranteed pen, and when this thing is churning out 440 alpha with its heat rounds as well that aren't even that bad, and they have also 340 heat pen, yeah, I mean, it's just not fun. I think that that's why these tanks are just super annoying, and why everyone hates them is because not only do they perform, they're annoying to play against, they don't have that many weak points, they are better than most tanks, and even some of the tanks that are a different class than it. This tank is better than some of the mediums. It may not have the gun depression, which is obviously a bit of a negative, but it still has a lot of other aspects of mediums that is capable of just being a nuisance to the enemy team. And you can see there, the Jaegeru bouncing off the tank. I mean, if he'd gone for the side armour, which is pretty much not great. It would have been able to pen, but if a player doesn't get the RNG roll where maybe the shell actually ends up going in the place where you didn't aim, which is probably 90% of the time, but it's just even more annoying. And it's why tanks like this can pick up 4,800 damage without even receiving a single shell so far. And yeah, I mean, what is a Malshan really going to do against the 279E? And you can see here the Malshan bouncing straight off of the 279, and at this point with the heat rounds, the Malshan, I mean, it is supposed to be a super heavy that has the armor to withstand some of the most brutal assaults from vehicles. And yeah, I mean, it is pretty brutal, the assault on the Malshan, and I don't know if he's withstanding it or just having to deal with the fact that he's going to be back in the garage a lot quicker and with basically no damage. And yeah, I mean, it feels so bad, and it's because of these reasons that not only is the tank, you know, very good, it's also like idiot proof. Like the 279E is almost idiot proof, because what do you have to do? Just keep your frontal armor towards the opponents, and you basically can't reliably be penned by most people in the game. And because of that, and it's because of the fact that even the worst players are able to have amazing games in this thing, that the best players are definitely going to be able to, and they're going to be having some pretty crap results. And when you have 440 alpha that the 279E has, it doesn't take a ton of rounds to be able to rack up a ton of damage. And when you're at close range fights with this thing, the armor becomes really good. It becomes somewhat harder for you to be able to find the side angles on this vehicle, and you can keep that frontal armor towards more opponents, making it even more difficult. And it's probably the only tank that I would be more than happy about in just literally sitting in front of people, and 9 times out of 10 you're still going to be able to bounce a ton of rounds, even if they know the weak points of the vehicle. And if you can keep your gun aiming at their weak points, this tank is just going to come out on top. Like, you put this up against an E100 or a Maus, 1 for 1, this tank is going to win every single time, and that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case that this will win in every single scenario, but it is, and that's what we've got to deal with. And once again, if they keep making vehicles like this that are just super, you know, broken or like super easy to play, like the BZ, the Chieftain, and everything like that, where they just have too many good things and too many things that are like the most annoying within the game, with the armor and the ability to just bounce rounds from some of the best aim shots, and you just rely on RNG basically saving you through it, then yeah, I mean, it's not particularly fun. Now, obviously, tanks like the T-54 Heavy, it's just nowhere near going to be able to deal with this, and it's not only because of the fact that, you know, it's a lower tier vehicle, because most lower tier vehicles are going to have a much tougher time up against vehicles like this that are tier higher. Wargaming try and balance these things against tier 10s, or make them more overpowered than tier 10s, so when you're in tier 9 or tier 8 games, they literally have no chance. And the amount of times that I've been in a tier 8 game and one of these things has been YOLO'd into me with a player that, I mean, doesn't have the best stats, and there's nothing you can really do. If someone chooses you with the 279E and they just purely want to remove you in the game without any thoughts of anyone else or the consequences of just YOLOing you, then I mean, yeah, there's not a lot you can do, and that is really a problem when it comes to vehicles like this, and it only seems to be getting worse. And that's why I wanted to highlight this video to you with 2 of the best replays in these tanks. Don't get me wrong, these are the very good players in their own right, and able to focus the areas of the game, playing them exactly what you need, having all of the basics covered, and still being able to annihilate opponents without any real trouble. And I mean, both of the tanks that we saw didn't really lose a whole lot of health within the first, you know, 5 minutes of the game, and it's exactly the same here. He's only lost, what, like 1,300 hit points or something in that region, and he's been able to deal at 12,900. He's blocked 5.8k, so literally double, if not more, than double the hit points of this vehicle. And yeah, I mean, E75 might be able to pen him once. It's going to get penned every time by the heat rounds of this thing. And I guess the saving grace for this tank and for those playing against it is that you do quickly get removed and you can end up back in the garage and pick a different tank and hope that you don't come up against another one in your next battle. And that shouldn't be the case. It completely detracts from the main game. It completely annoys people and just makes this tank just super horrible for everyone to play against. To play, it's very boring. It's not that rewarding to play either because of the fact that, you know, you're playing in a broken tank, so it feels a hell of a lot less of an accomplishment when you do 10k in this thing than it would in a lot of the other vehicles. And hopefully today's video has given you a good overview of the two tanks and why they're broken, and more so about why Wargaming are kind of coming up with these vehicles, and if they continue it's really going to become a problem. But if you have enjoyed, please do think about subscribing and checking out some of the other videos on the channel, and I hope you did enjoy this one. Let me know your thoughts as well, as that is really important, because I don't know what you guys are thinking. Maybe I got these two tanks completely wrong and you think that some of the tier 8s are way more overpowered. Let me know and I'll cover those in a video coming soon. Thank you and goodbye.